everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today, we'll be discussing cloud adoption in the context of a migration from our self-hosted solutions to the Atlassian Cloud. At Atlassian, we often say that cloud migrations are a team sport. It takes a powerhouse group of people to execute a large-scale transformation like a migration. And if we extend the team sport metaphor, the final phase of migration, which is getting your users productive on a new platform, is the fourth quarter. That's when teams with endurance and preparation emerge victorious. But mustering the determination you need to execute a great adoption program can be challenging, and it can be tempting to assume your users will just figure it out by themselves or organically. To realize the full ROI of your move to the Atlassian Cloud, you need to focus time and energy on ensuring your teams embrace new ways of working across the Atlassian Cloud platform. My name is Roxanne Bernard, and I'm a customer success manager here at Atlassian. Today, the team and I will take you on an adoption journey through the eyes of two cloud migrations. So let's take a look at these two separate migration journeys, fictionalized, of course. These migration journeys are similar in some ways and different in others. I'll hand it over to my colleague, Mark Watson, to introduce himself and talk about our first company, B Industries.
Hey everybody, I'm Mark Watson. I'm an enterprise cloud migration manager at Atlassian, in my normal day job anyway. Today I am representing a project manager role at B Industries. So in today's comparison of our two migration journeys, we'll be covering how B Industries planned, tested, and migrated our data to cloud. Our overall migration was considered a success, but you'll quickly see along the way that we excluded some sections and some really best practices that, we didn't consider the needs of our end users. Compared to our friends over at ACME Inc., we overlooked some users in our plan, our test, and our post-migration phases. Along the way, we skipped some business goals and really missed out on the best that Atlassian Cloud has to offer. So with that, let me hand it over to my colleague, Amna.
Thank you, Mark. Hello all, my name is Amnaalabas, and I'm an Enterprise Cloud Migration Manager here at Atlassian. Today I'll be representing a fictional character at ACME Inc. and walk you through the cloud migration journey. At ACME Inc., we are an enterprise organization. We have several thousands of employees and multiple business units. We are a leader in our industry, and we embrace technology and change and always strive to be best in class. During the migration journey, our business teams identified different user groups to make sure users' needs were considered throughout the migration. We also used effective change management best practices to consider the changes introduced by the cloud migration. Now over to Mark for the agenda.
Thanks, Amna. So what we'd like to cover today is really three things. First off, migrations at a glance. This is taking a look at what a cloud migration typically consists of, just so we have a good baseline understanding of the phases and the players that are involved. Then we'll walk through a fictional migration journey of our two companies from pre-migration to post-migration, and then we'll end up with some adoption tips and resources to recap what we covered today, how those resources will help, and more importantly, how you can tailor them to your own migration. So with that, let's take a look at the migration phases.
We have broken down the migration process into phases. This is a pretty linear visualization of the process. We understand that things don't always happen in this order, but this is a great general framework. Each phase requires you to hit certain milestones, which we will speak about during this tour we are taking you on, and compare what ACME Inc. and B Industries have done.
Now that you have a good overview of a migration, let's take a look at how ACME Inc. and B Industries approach cloud adoption throughout their migration, phase by phase. I'll give the mic back to Mark to give a brief overview of the assess phase of a migration and how B Industries approached it.
Thanks, Roxanne. So stepping into the assess phase, this is the start of the migration journey, both for you, for B Industries, and for ACME Inc. So in this particular phase, we want to assess requirements and decide if and when a cloud migration is right for you or your company. This is also where we're analyzing the current landscape of what you're trying to achieve as you move to cloud, and we're starting to assemble the migration team to help get us there. So as we put that into our fictionalized example of B Industries, we did a pretty good job of this. We took a look at what our migration goals are. We started to work through some of those basics of why should we move to cloud? What will we gain or lose? How many products will we migrate? How many apps do we have to install? How many users do we have? But you can see that we also started to zero in really quickly on the technical moving parts of our migration and started to leave out some of the best practices around end user management or end user adoption. So we asked all the right questions. We considered if cloud was a good fit for us, but our friends at ACME did quite a bit more to make their cloud migration a success. That success started here in the assess phase. So let's take a look back in with Amna and see what she and the ACME team did better here.
We did thorough research during the assess phase and engaged the Atlassian commercial team to evaluate whether the cloud is the right fit for us, what is the value, and what were the risks involved. We also had a very clear understanding of the finances and the return on investment. We discussed which apps are available in cloud and what would be the alternatives and the key differences. We have assembled the dream team and involved all the relevant stakeholders in the organization to receive the buy-in from everyone and promote the visibility of the project within the wider organization, which led to receiving the security and compliance sign-off internally somewhat a smooth process.
So as Amna mentioned, ACME Inc. built their adoption dream team at the very beginning of their migration journey, as every successful rollout starts with a team. Let's zoom in on what a good composition of an adoption team looks like. So as a migrating customer, you'll want to build out the right team ahead of time so you can work together to define and tackle all the different moving pieces of a migration. A key roles to consider are an executive sponsor. An endorsement from your executive sponsor can really help push the change forward, convince naysayers, and promote visibility across the wider organization. Another important stakeholder is to have a project owner, who is the individual directly responsible for the success of this initiative. Other players that should be part of the team are technical subject matter experts, as they are very important for understanding how the products work in your environment. Lastly, you should also enroll business subject matter experts who can provide input on internal sentiment, resistance to change, and how to best approach communication and training from a business process perspective. Now, let's see what B Industries and ACME Inc. did differently or similarly in the plan phase of their respective migrations.
So stepping back into the migration timeline, now we're moved from assess and we've moved into plan. We've decided on our cloud destination and we've started to plan the technical and operational aspects of the migration itself. This is where we also selected a migration strategy and a method to migrate all of our data. And we started to formulate the project plan and the timeline that'll help us get there. However, if we overlay this against B Industries, the team and I weren't as successful. We flew through stakeholder analysis in the plan phase, completely skipped over a few different user groups, and made the mistake of only involving our technical folks. So we skipped over the end users who would actually be using the products day to day and were thus most impacted by the change of moving to cloud. So we had a bit of a missed opportunity here to include users throughout the migration lifecycle. And you'll start to see as we move through the plan, prep, and test phases that our migration plan really started to fall apart since everything was done in isolation. The end result was that users were either unaware or not included, and a lot of that confusion started right here in plan. As I hand over to Amna for the ACME side of things, you'll see that they did a little bit of a better job of including users to reduce that confusion.
We knew from very early on that cloud migration is a team sport. During the plan phase, we communicated to the wider organization about the plan to migrate to cloud and how this would impact the business users to set the right expectations. We also started scoping out the migration and dependencies and analyzing our data shape and apps. And we worked closely with the Atlassian and our solution partner to help finalize the migration strategy and which tooling we will use and the steps we need to get us there.
On top of this, ACME Inc., with their adoption team that they put together previously, started defining success early on. They decided on what success looked like for them and then identified their top success metrics. When preparing for migration, it's really important to build in a measurement strategy pre-migration to track success metrics and then continuously improve on those metrics post-migration. Let's move on to the prep phase. I'll hand it over back to Mark to see to know what B Industries did and ACME Inc. did.
Thanks, Roxanne. So moving into the prep phase, this is where the plan really starts to take shape, and all the good things that we've planned in the plan phase start to allow us to prepare the destination and the source site for migration to cloud. This is where we also start defining what success looks like in cloud. From a B Industries perspective, the team and I did a pretty okay job here. We started preparing our source and our destination instances, did all the technical things to get our source instance ready, get our destination instance ready to receive that data. And we also did talk about success measures and what that would look like. Unfortunately, we jumped immediately into some of those specifics and again focused on the technical dependencies, like upgrading our self-managed products to supported versions, cleaning up user data, removing duplicate users, getting all those technical moving parts ready to go. We did end up getting our Jira and Confluence technical data ready to migrate, and everything was sort of successful, or at least appeared to be, as we started to move into the test phase. However, we also started to run into some surprises and uncovered some dependencies that we didn't anticipate. We also discovered along the way some integrations with other teams that we hadn't even considered. Had we included those user groups to help voice some of those dependencies and really talk about how their day-to-day life was impacted, or their day-to-day ways of working in Jira or Confluence were impacted, we wouldn't have run into those surprises so late in the game. So we minimized the process and the people aspect of our cloud migration and put too much focus on the technical. This continued to haunt us throughout the rest of the migration. Amna, how did things turn out for ACME?
Well, Mark, as things progressed to the prep phase, we prepped our on-prem and cloud environment and upgraded our self-managed products to a supported version. We also performed all the cleanup activities, and by now we had the migration strategy locked in. We also continuously communicated to the end users about the changes that were about to happen.
Speaking of adoption, to prepare success for the cloud, ACME Inc. identified their key use cases, as change is not just about the people. It's not just about the product, it's also about the people. If you want to get people using a new tool or to follow a new process, one of the best ways to motivate people is to do this by solving a challenge they currently face. To do this, you need to identify current challenges and determine how you can use Atlassian products to help solve these challenges. So once ACME Inc. had identified the key use cases, they also built out a training and support plan and prepared the communication program with a clear timeline of when and what will be communicated and on which channels. Since most users spend the majority of their time in product, creating and editing Jira issues or Confluence pages, they focused their attention on helping users navigate changes to these most frequent tasks. The support plan included the quick start guides for Jira Software, Jira Service Management, and Confluence. These guides are all included in the Atlassian Cloud Adoption Toolkit. Speaking of the Cloud Adoption Toolkit, let's now take a step back from this migration journey to have a closer look at what this useful kit contains. All right, so the Cloud Adoption Toolkit is a one-stop shop providing guidance and resources to help set up your end users for success in the cloud following a migration. It is freely available on the Atlassian website for everyone to download and use. The kit is separate in different parts, which we'll represent shortly. The first part of the adoption kit is a comprehensive guide with 5 chapters containing the best practices for setting up your organization for success in the Atlassian Cloud. From theory on why change management and adoption matter for your organization, to concrete examples on how to build out a rollout plan and how to build, train, and nurture an internal champions community. You can lean on this guide for guidance and resources to help set up your end users for success. The guide also offers Atlassian's top adoption and change management practices, as well as additional resources, such as the Atlassian community and our wide network of enterprise partners. Now, let's see what the toolkit has in store for you for the change management component. I'll hand it over back to Mark.
Cloud migration is such a big change, so change management and its best practices are really important. So the idea here is that we provide some email templates that are designed to help make it easier for you as admins or the administrators to communicate changes to end users regarding the launch of the cloud products. So this is importantly done in 2 phases, both pre-migration and post-migration. So to help teams get up and running in cloud sooner, we've created a set of modifiable email templates that you can tailor to inform users and to inform teams about your cloud launch. This helps communicate to end users and stakeholders alike what's changing, where to go for help, and how to get started planning out those changes in cloud. It's also important to keep in mind that teams will need to hear this message multiple times throughout the migration. It takes a little bit for things to sink in. Communication methods are also important since teams will need to hear things multiple times and in multiple ways as well before making the change. Allowing teams the time that they need to digest the change, get comfortable with it, and receive that change will help make sure that they remain open to it and prepared ultimately when the rollout takes place. So the idea here is that when the message comes from someone that they trust, end users will be more likely to listen. Now let's take a look at the admin enablement guide with Amna.
Admin Enablement Guide highlights the main changes users should expect to see when they transition from self-hosted environments to cloud for Confluence, Jira Software, and Jira Service Management. This guide also provides all the information needed, such as interface differences between our self-hosted and cloud products, how to access your new cloud site, and the new features that are available on the cloud. It is recommended to share this guide with your admins early in the migration so that they can get themselves acquainted with the changes and proactively communicate these changes with your end users before they reach the cloud so that everyone is aware of the differences beforehand. I will now pass it back to Mark, who will go over the product-specific guide.
So product-specific guides are really cool because this helps make sure that users are covered specifically with the changes that are going to impact them as you land in cloud. And so these communication templates are specifically approaching communications from the vantage point of what's changing in Jira Software, Confluence Cloud, and Jira Service Management as users start to use cloud for the first time. These guides are a great way to quickly enable users to work with teams, and the spirit behind them is to get everything going and ready for day one use. That way there's minimal interruption or minimal disruption to productivity. So stepping back into the migration process for a minute, now we've moved into the test phase. Let's see how both ACME and B Industries did in the test phase. So for B Industries, at this stage of the migration, we still had no formal communication plan in place. Some of our executives told managers to warn their team members that the change was coming, but nothing really formal was established. Again, we had excluded significant user groups from the testing process. So as we started to move through user acceptance testing and really test out the cloud stuff that we were migrating, we thought everything was successful, but underneath there was a bit of a different story. We had a lot to fix between the test and migrate phase, and that started now. Over at ACME, I think they did things a little bit better. Amna, can we check in with you to see how that went?
Sure. When we got to testing, we ensured we had at least one full successful end-to-end test to confirm the migration actually works. We also involved some of our end users from different business units and champions to do the user acceptance testing so we can receive the green light that everything is working as expected, and we had the runbook finalized. We also took all the learnings from this test phase to reduce the unknown risks along the way and to ensure we have a smooth production migration.
In terms of adoption and change management, ACME Inc. also leveraged the modifiable email templates contained in the Cloud Adoption Toolkit. This gave their teams the time they needed to get comfortable with the new change and ensure they are open to it and prepared when the rollout actually takes place. Ongoing engagement with your end users is a key part of driving lasting change, as it takes time for people to acknowledge, accept, and adapt to changes. Let's move on to the migrate phase and see the differences between B Industries and ACME Inc. Back to you, Mark.
So the migration phase is where the magic really starts to happen. Testing is complete, and now it's time to migrate to the cloud. So at B Industries, for the migration phase, we sent our first official communication memo warning our large user base the migration was happening over an upcoming weekend. Unfortunately, we had multiple people out of the office and multiple users who missed the email. The result was that come Monday, everything had migrated successfully, but end users were very frustrated because everything had changed. Several users weren't aware that the change had happened. Where's my stuff? Where can I get my job done? How do I function? And all of that basically flowed calls to our IT service desk in the form of unplanned incidents. All of that could have been avoided if we had used some of those handy email templates that Roxanne had walked us through previously. So let's check in with Amna to see how ACME did this a little bit more successful and made things more comfortable for its end users. Amna, can you tell us more?
Yes, thank you, Mark. Once the testing was complete, we had the confidence that our weekend production migration was going to be a success. And we were right. Because of the proper planning and the continuous user communication engagement, we have finally parted ways with our life on-prem, and we were ready to start our new life in the cloud.
And on top of this, ACME Inc. also engaged their champions, which are the cheerleaders of this change. Champions are enthusiastic teammates who are embedded within your teams, so they were very well positioned to build trust and spread positive sentiment. By identifying champions across ACME, this amplified their message and gained momentum organically within the organization. Now, let's check in with Mark to see how the B industry teams are doing right after the migration when their users are just getting to the cloud at the launch phase.
So right after the migration, right after the dust settles on the migration, now we're up and running in cloud and ready to onboard users for the first time. From a B industry's perspective, our leadership teams had assumed that teams would just go back to business as usual after moving to cloud. How hard could it possibly be, right? So unfortunately, that wasn't the case. We ended up having that higher incident rate, as I previously mentioned. So as users started using cloud, things got even worse. The confusion continued from an end user vantage point about how to use cloud, where to go for help. They really struggled to understand how to use Jira, how to use Confluence, and how to get their day-to-day jobs done. So we missed the opportunity here to provide end user facing documentation, quick reference guides. We failed to supply knowledge base articles to our support teams to answer common end user questions or concerns. And the end result was a bit of a bumpy ride for both users and our support teams alike. At the end of the day, we were technically an overall success. B industries did make it across the finish line, just like ACME. But we did so with a lot more speed bumps along the way and a much higher degree of friction from all the changes that came with cloud migration. So our journey was a good one, but a more difficult one. Amna, how are things different over at ACME Industries?
Well, we had a seamless launch in the cloud. The users logged in and were able to continue business as usual. And we also leveraged our champions for the users who had questions about specific features and how certain functionality works. The project was perceived as a massive success at ACME Inc.
Speaking of a seamless launch, at the launch of the migration, with their ongoing engagement, ACME Inc. also leveraged the product-specific guides for their end users, as well as the comprehensive admin guide from the Atlassian Cloud Adoption Toolkit. They also monitored feedback channels to see if their teams were asking for additional features on the cloud or struggled with anything. They've also kept a very close look on the metrics that they had defined earlier on. All right, now let's fast forward to a few weeks later to see how B Industries and ACME Inc. are living their lives in the cloud.
So from a life in cloud perspective, we again successfully migrated data to the cloud and everything was available to end users. But unfortunately, users didn't know how to use the data that was there or really make the most of their investment in cloud. The result was that managers and leadership received multiple requests from end users about how to use different features and how to perform their day-to-day tasks with using their new cloud tools. So at B Industries, we decided to send out some communication as a result of that to help communicate some of those changes and to try to help users with how to use the new cloud tools, but it was too little too late. Some users had already abandoned using Jira and Confluence and had found easier ways of doing things. They weren't the tools that they know and loved and used before, but they were still consistently allowing them to get their job done. ACME, on the other hand, had much different results.
At ACME Inc., we had a training and support plan in place, and we made use of the courses on the Atlassian University to make sure that all the users were enabled on the new cloud tools. And we also nurtured our champions community.
ACME Inc. also took this one step further, and they created a champion Slack channel so that this one was used to communicate new features and program updates. They hosted monthly office hours where champions were able to network, exchange best practices, and learn about other departments and how they were using the Atlassian products. ACME also rewarded their champions and recognized their hard work to keep them engaged and motivated. This resulted in very high adoption of the Atlassian tools across the organization. I'll pass it back to Mark and Amna for a very brief recap of both migration journeys.
Thanks, Roxanne. So looking back over the migrations, we can really see across the two different journeys for B Industries and for ACME that both were successful from a data or a technical perspective. So the data did move from server or on-prem instances to cloud, and users were ultimately able to make use of those in both environments. Unfortunately for B Industries, we saw that because of our lack of planning and involvement with the user community, that users ended up moving to different tools due to some of the frustration that was there. We also created new siloed working environments, which is undesirable. Teams had worked pretty well together using Jira and Confluence before. We had workflows that on-prem allowed teams to exchange information and freely work together. We ended up breaking those as we moved to cloud. So everything migrated successfully, but the ways that the teams use them to integrate with each other weren't considered. And so many of those simply broke down as we moved to cloud because we didn't plan effectively to get there. The result of all of that was decreased productivity, decreased efficiency. So again, a little bit of overall success from a technical perspective, but things would have gone much more smoothly had we followed ACME's example. Amna, how are things for you in the ACME team?
At ACME, because we included and involved the users from early on, it really helped them understand what was happening when changes occurred and how to get help once the migration was completed. The users felt informed, included, and comfortable using the Atlassian Cloud on day one, with minimal disruption to our day-to-day business operations. Project stakeholders also reviewed the product documentation and worked with Atlassian to understand the new cloud features and improvements. So deployment of these new features could be realized as part of the migration to the Atlassian Cloud, which resulted in a positive return on investment. Now I will hand it over to Roxanne so that we can take a closer look at some of the adoption best practices.
All right, so now that we've seen the importance of preparing for cloud adoption before actually reaching the cloud, let's take a moment to take a closer look at a few key adoption best practices. So the 3 best practices for optimal cloud adoption are first to leverage our comprehensive catalog of courses on the Atlassian University. Second is to nurture your internal champions. And last is to put an emphasis on ongoing engagement with your users. These are all practices that ACME Inc. had put in place in their fictional migration journey and were really instrumental in the adoption of the tools once in the cloud. I'll hand it over back to Amna for a very brief overview of the Atlassian University.
Keep in mind that everyone learns and absorbs information in different ways. A range of individuals like to read, some prefer to watch, while others like to listen. The Atlassian University provides different mediums to cater to different learning styles, hence optimizing the learning journey for every individual. After the initial trainings, your teams will likely have questions and need ongoing support. So consider creating a Teams or a Slack channel where people can get help and ask questions. Now I'll hand it over back to Roxanne to walk us through nurturing the internal champions.
Thanks, Amna. All right, so a champions community is one of the biggest secrets to a successful rollout. Your champions community will be comprised of individual champions who can assist others during the rollout. So who can be a champion? Well, it could literally be anyone. From new hires to executives, anyone can be a champion if they're passionate about helping drive change within their department. One really good tip is that if your Atlassian products are used by different teams, departments, or they have different use cases across different geographies, make sure to identify and engage champions that reflect this diversity so that the majority of your users are more closely connected to the champions. So how can you actually identify these people? Your system admins can identify your champions by looking at users with the highest login counts or users that have created or updated the most projects, workflows, custom fields, apps, and etc. Regardless of their range of experience with the Atlassian products, we highly recommend training your champions consistently so that everyone can be on the same page. I'll move on to ongoing engagement, which was probably the practice that ACME Inc. put in place the most, which is really a key part of driving lasting change and adoption. Once you hit send on your emails announcing the change, your work is really just beginning. It will take time for people to acknowledge, accept, and adapt to the change. Take this into account when you're building your communications plan. You will probably need to do multiple rounds of communications for the change to settle in. And the technology you'll deploy will change over time. So be sure to keep your users up to date with the latest features, for example. In terms of show and tell, consider the following. You can host a lunch and learn training session for users to get hands-on with the products. Consider department-specific training sessions to train users on their specific use cases. We'll give you bonus point if your champions run these sessions. And lastly, don't forget to record these sessions so they can be revisited in the future and reused for new employees as they join your organization. As for tracking metrics, there are several questions you can ask yourself and your team. You can consider the following questions as a good starting point when you're tracking metrics for success. All right, I'll hand it over back to Mark for some closeout remarks.
Thanks, Roxanne. So let's recap the tale of our 2 different migration journeys. look at where to go from here, and also highlight the helpful resources that we've covered today. So we've covered the migration journey of 2 different companies, both successful from a technical standpoint and a pretty overall good end result. But ACME was much more smooth. It had its end users involved throughout the migration process. And our other fictional example, B Industries, was less focused on change management and end user best practices. So you can start to see which one we would recommend from the Atlassian standpoint and our motivation for pulling together the Cloud Adoption Toolkit. So where to from here? That's where we come in from the Atlassian side. We want you to succeed like ACME with less friction and a higher degree of user satisfaction, which, reminder, is where the Cloud Adoption Toolkit comes in. So we'd really like you to take this toolkit, take a look at it, plan migrations in mind with a strong change management hat on, and more importantly, through the eyes and experiences of end users. That's the key takeaway for where we failed and were less successful with B Industries. Also important is to be sure to include any business goals in your migration process and your communication. So really take the time to share with end users why the organization's moving to cloud, along with what to expect when they get there. And lastly, we'd like to focus or highlight again the Cloud Adoption Toolkit. So we're pretty proud of all of the work that's gone into this and the end result that helps companies like you be more successful migrating to cloud. Most importantly as well, if you need any help along the way, we do have an army of Atlassians here and available to help. So with that, thanks for spending time with us today. And we hope as you consider your own cloud migration, that you'll be less like B Industries and more like ACME. So make use of the Cloud Adoption Toolkit today to truly involve end users throughout the migration lifecycle and ultimately help you make the best of your investment in Atlassian Cloud.